Chapter 1, The Cage and the Callsign. Jack Callahan woke to the taste of blood in his mouth. His head throbbed, a dull, insistent pain pulsing behind his skull. Cold metal pressed against his back. He opened his eyes, adjusting to the dim red lighting of the slave hold. The air was thick with sweat, fear, and the faint ozone tang of alien machinery. He sat up slowly, taking in his surroundings. Rows of prisoners, alien and human alike, huddled behind energy-barred cells. Some were silent, others whispering in voices thick with despair. Across from him, a reptilian creature with 4 yellow eyes flinched in his gaze. Heavy footfalls echoed down the corridor. Jack turned his head slightly, keeping his movements controlled. A Xeldar overseer stalked toward his cell, armored from head to toe in segmented plating. The creature's elongated skull tapered to a ridged crest, its black eyes reflecting the dull glow of the ship's lighting. The overseer sneered. "Awake at last. I was beginning to think humans were as fragile as they looked." Jack didn't answer. He was still cataloging details. The cuffs on his wrists hummed with an energy field, some kind of restraint tech. The cell bars pulsed in slow intervals, probably tied to an external power source. No obvious control panel within reach. The guards carried shock batons and plasma sidearms. The Xeldar stepped closer, pressing a button on his wrist console. A surge of electricity shot through Jack's restraints. Pain seared through his arms and spine, but he clenched his jaw, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a scream. The alien chuckled. "You'll learn your place soon enough." Jack exhaled slowly, forcing his body to relax despite the lingering pain. "You have no idea who you just locked up, do you?" The overseer's amusement faltered. "You are nothing. A weak species that." A deep, metallic clang interrupted him. The doors at the end of the corridor slid open, and a towering figure entered. The other prisoners shrank back. High Warden Xorvath. Unlike his subordinates, Xorvath carried himself with deliberate grace. His armor gleamed under the dim lights, reinforced plating etched with intricate symbols of rank. Twin fangs protruded slightly from his lower jaw, and his pale blue skin was marked with ceremonial scars. His cold gaze swept over the prisoners before settling on Jack. "So," Xorvath murmured, tilting his head. "You are the human soldier who killed 20 of my hunters before falling." Jack rolled his shoulders, testing the limits of his restraints. 23, he corrected. The warden's expression didn't change, but the air between them shifted. The overseer beside him stiffened. "You amuse me," Xorvath said. "But you will break like all the others." Jack smiled, all teeth, no warmth. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." Xorvath studied him for a moment longer before chuckling, a deep, reverberating sound. "A defiant one. I will enjoy watching your spirit shatter." He gestured toward the guards. "Prepare the human for processing." 2 Xeldar stepped forward, unlocking the cell door. Jack remained seated, calculating. 1 guard reached for him. Jack moved. Even restrained, he was faster than they expected. He drove his shoulder into the first guard's midsection, knocking him backward. The second guard swung a baton. Jack twisted, letting the blow glance off his upper arm, then snapped his bound hands up, ramming the cuffs into the alien's throat. The overseer fumbled for his weapon. Jack kicked his knee out from under him, then pivoted, slamming his elbow into the first guard's face. The Xeldar staggered, but Jack wasn't done. He hooked a foot behind the alien's leg and drove him into the floor with a sickening crack. The stun batons clattered to the ground. Jack grabbed one with his still-bound hands. The charge crackled to life. Xorvath watched, unimpressed. "Interesting," he mused, "but ultimately pointless." Jack turned the baton in his grip, eyes locked on the warden. His heartbeat was steady. Controlled. He could feel the weight of every prisoner's gaze on him. Xorvath sighed, almost disappointed. He tapped his wrist console. The cuffs on Jack's wrists flared. Agony ripped through his nerves, seizing his muscles, dropping him to his knees. His vision blurred. He barely felt the guards hauling him upright, barely registered the sharp crack of a baton against his ribs. Xorvath crouched before him. "You are nothing here, Reaper." Jack gritted his teeth through the pain. "We'll see about that." The warden chuckled again, standing. "Take him to interrogation." The guards dragged Jack away, but he wasn't focused on them. His mind was already working, already adjusting, already planning. Because Xorvath had just made his first mistake. He thought Jack Callahan was just another prisoner. He had no idea he'd locked himself inside with a predator. Chapter 2, Unleashing the Reaper. Pain burned through Jack's body as the guards dragged him down the metallic corridors of the blood chain. His arms were still restrained, his ribs ached from the repeated blows, but his mind remained sharp. He ignored the throbbing in his skull, cataloging details, the number of doors they passed, the placement of surveillance units, the weapons at his captor's sides. Every second brought him closer to an opening. They reached a heavy, reinforced door. One of the guards pressed a control panel, and the door slid open with a low hiss. Jack was hauled inside and thrown onto a metal chair, his wrists magnetically locked to the armrests. The room was sterile, illuminated by cold white lights. A table sat between him and an array of sleek, alien interrogation tools. Xorvath stood at the far end, observing him with calculated interest. The warden moved with the slow confidence of a man convinced he was in control. He activated a console, and a thin, needle-like device hovered in the air, pulsating with blue energy. "This device can bypass the brain's natural defenses," Xorvath said, tracing a clawed finger over the controls. "I could make you feel as if your very bones were splintering apart, yet leave no physical trace." He tilted his head. "But I would rather not waste time on pain. I am more interested in what makes humans different." Jack met his gaze without flinching. "That's easy," he said. "We don't stay in cages." Xorvath chuckled. "You truly believe you have a chance to escape?" Jack only smiled. The warden sighed. "Very well." He nodded to the guards. One stepped forward, holding a syringe filled with a luminescent green liquid. Jack tensed. He had no intention of finding out what the serum did. As the guard leaned in, Jack made his move. He jerked his head forward, smashing his forehead into the alien's face. The impact cracked cartilage. The guard reeled back with a snarl, dropping the syringe. Jack twisted his wrists against the restraints, feeling the metal give slightly under pressure. The distraction was enough. The moment the warden shifted back, Jack yanked forward with all his strength. The restraint bolt strained, then snapped. He surged upward, grabbing the dropped syringe and jamming it into the guard's exposed throat. The alien convulsed, choking on its own breath as the foreign chemical spread through its system. Jack seized the fallen baton and turned on the second guard. The Xeldar raised his plasma weapon, but Jack was faster. He drove the baton into the alien's forearm, sending a pulse of energy through its nervous system. The guard's grip faltered. Jack caught the plasma pistol midair, spun it around, and fired. A bolt of searing energy burned through the Xeldar's skull. Xorvath took a step back, his expression unreadable. Jack turned the plasma pistol toward him. "Not so confident now, are you?" The warden exhaled, almost amused. "Interesting." Without warning, he pressed a button on his gauntlet. The room's security alarms blared to life. Jack had no time to waste. He grabbed the second guard's belt, yanking free a combat knife and a spare power cell. Then he bolted. The hallway outside was already in chaos. Xeldar soldiers converged toward the interrogation chamber, weapons raised. Jack moved before they could fire, ducking low and rolling behind a storage crate. He peeked out, assessing. 5 of them. Plasma rifles. Heavy armor. He needed to be smarter. A quick scan of the area revealed an overhead maintenance hatch. It was too high to reach without help. Jack's gaze flicked to a stack of reinforced supply crates along the wall. That would do. He sprinted. Plasma fire erupted behind him, scorching the floor where he'd stood seconds ago. Jack leapt onto the crates, using the momentum to propel himself upward. He grabbed the maintenance hatch's handle, pulling it open just as another volley of shots slammed into the metal. Jack hauled himself inside, crawling through the dimly lit ventilation system. The ship's hum vibrated beneath his hands. He needed a plan. Taking the bridge was impossible alone, but causing havoc? That he could do. He followed the vents toward the prison hold. The sight below stopped him cold. Dozens of prisoners sat in their cells, silent, hopeless. Some were human, others from species he didn't recognize. He spotted a control terminal nearby, guarded by a single Zeldar. Perfect. Jack dropped from the vent without hesitation. The guard barely had time to react before Jack's knife found its throat. Blood splattered across the console as the alien crumpled. Jack wiped the blade on his sleeve and turned to the prisoners. One of them, a human woman with cropped black hair, stared at him in shock. "Who the hell are you?" Jack smirked. "Reaper." Her eyes widened. Others began murmuring. The name had weight. Jack turned to the control panel. He skimmed the interface, searching for the release mechanism. Alien symbols scrolled across the screen, but the layout was similar to human systems. He pressed a series of commands. A loud clank echoed through the chamber. The cell doors slid open. For the first time since his capture, Jack saw something new in the prisoner's eyes. Hope. The woman stepped forward, rolling her shoulders. "What's the plan?" Jack checked his stolen plasma pistol. "We take the ship." A heavy pounding sounded from the corridor. Zeldar reinforcements were coming. Jack turned to the freed captives. "Anyone with combat experience, arm yourselves. The rest, find cover." Some prisoners grabbed fallen weapons. Others simply clenched their fists, ready to fight with whatever they had. The Zeldar had broken them, but now, Jack had given them something to fight for. The door exploded inward. Jack fired first. The plasma bolt struck a Zeldar square in the chest. The fight erupted into chaos. Prisoners surged forward, overwhelming the slavers with sheer numbers. Jack moved through the melee with ruthless efficiency, striking, dodging, killing. The woman fought beside him, wielding a stolen baton with brutal precision. She blocked a strike, then drove the weapon into her attacker's skull. She turned to Jack. "You got a name besides Reaper?" "Jack Callahan." She grinned despite the carnage. "Alicia Torres. Let's make these bastards pay." The battle was quick, violent. When the last Zeldar fell, the surviving prisoners stood amid the wreckage, panting, bloodied, but victorious. Jack surveyed the group. "This isn't over. We need to get to the armory. Then we take the bridge." Torres nodded. "Lead the way, Reaper." Jack reloaded his weapon, already thinking ahead. This ship wasn't just an escape. It was a message. And he was going to make sure the entire Zeldar Dominion heard it loud and clear. Chapter 3, The Blood Chain Burns. Jack Callahan moved like a man with a mission. Plasma pistol gripped tight, combat knife strapped to his thigh, every step fueled by purpose. Around him, the freed prisoners followed, some armed with scavenged weapons, others relying on sheer determination. The halls of the blood chain pulsed with red emergency lighting, alarms screaming through the corridors. Torres jogged beside him, reloading a stolen rifle. "The whole ship knows we're loose. Expect heavy resistance." Jack smirked. "Good. Let them come." The armory was 2 decks up. The Zeldar weren't going to make this easy. The first blockade came fast, 5 slavers positioned at the intersection, rifles raised. Jack barely had time to signal before plasma fire rained down the corridor. He dove for cover, rolling behind a bulkhead as bolts scorched the walls. "Torres, flank left," he barked. Soren, suppressing fire. The burly, one-eyed prisoner, Soren, a former colonial marine, didn't need to be told twice. He stepped out, firing in controlled bursts. Torres sprinted low and fast, hugging the wall as she closed the distance. Jack used the distraction. He burst forward, pistol kicking in his grip as he took two of the slavers down with clean headshots. A third turned too slow. Jack was already there, slamming his blade under the alien's jaw, twisting, then yanking free. Torres finished the last two with precise rifle fire. The silence afterward was brief. Jack wiped the knife on his sleeve and nodded. "Keep moving." They pushed forward, navigating the ship's winding passages. Zeldar forces closed in fast, but the tide was shifting. The prisoners fought with the ferocity of men and women who had suffered too long. For every slaver they took down, their numbers grew as more captives joined. By the time they reached the armory, they were no longer just a group of survivors. They were an army. The doors were locked tight. A reinforced blast door, thick enough to withstand direct hull breaches. Jack studied the control panel. It would take too long to hack. They needed another way in. Torres glanced at him. "Ideas?" Jack looked back down the corridor. "Yeah. A big one." Soren's grin was savage. "You want to blow it?" "Damn right." Jack gestured to the fallen Zeldar guards. "Find me charges." It took less than a minute. The slavers had carried small explosive devices, enough to breach a reinforced door if placed right. Jack set them in a tight pattern around the locks, then stepped back. "Everyone clear," he ordered. They moved behind cover. Jack hit the detonator. A concussive blast rocked the corridor. The blast doors buckled, then crumpled inward, thick smoke curling from the edges. Jack was the first inside. The armory was a treasure trove: plasma rifles, railguns, explosives, even powered exosuits meant for Zeldar elites. The prisoners wasted no time, grabbing whatever they could carry. Jack armed himself with a heavy-duty pulse rifle, checking its charge. Torres held up a grenade belt. "Now we're talking." Jack strapped extra mags to his vest. "We hit the bridge next." Alicia slung a rifle over her shoulder. "And if the warden's waiting?" Jack locked eyes with her. "Then I finish this." The final stand. The battle for the bridge was fast and brutal. Jack led the charge, cutting through the last of the Zeldar resistance with precision. The slavers fought viciously, but they were used to breaking weak prisoners, not facing a coordinated rebellion. The tide turned quickly. By the time they breached the final door, Jack knew they had won. Xorvath stood at the center of the command deck, watching the carnage unfold on the flickering monitors. Unlike his panicked officers, the warden remained still, composed. His piercing black eyes met Jack's. "So," Xorvath murmured, "you made it." Jack stepped forward, rifle raised. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." The warden exhaled, almost amused. "I underestimated you, Reaper." His gaze swept the room, the fallen slavers, the armed prisoners. He nodded slowly. "Impressive. But tell me, now that you have taken my ship, what will you do with it?" Jack didn't hesitate. "We burn it to the ground." Xorvath's lips curled. "Then do it." Jack fired. The plasma bolt tore through the warden's chest. Xorvath staggered, then sank to his knees, exhaling one final breath. His body hit the floor. Silence. Then Torres exhaled. "Damn. That felt good." Jack turned to the prisoners. "Set course for the nearest human outpost. Get the wounded stable. And prepare for a final transmission." Soren grinned. "You sending a message?" Jack's eyes burned cold. "Yeah. The Zeldar need to know what happens when they take humans as slaves." He activated the ship's comms, broadcasting on all Dominion channels. His voice was steady. "This is Reaper. The blood chain belongs to us now. If you come for us again, we'll come for you first." The war wasn't over. But tonight, humanity had won.